Some are calling him the wild card of the GOP presidential candidates. Ron Paul. A new CNN ORC international poll shows Paul surging. This as Newt Gingrich's lead evaporates. Now, a lot of people are asking this morning, could Ron Paul actually win in Iowa? John Avalon thinks so. He's a CNN contributor and senior political columnist of Newsweek and the Daily Beast. Good morning. Nice to see you, John. As always, you're just back from Iowa, as a matter of fact. I want to talk a little bit about this formula that Nate Silver of the New York Times came up with, and basically a very sophisticated one. He factors in polls, momentum, undecided voters, and look at what we came out with. We want to put this up on the screen here. 52% favor Ron Paul. 52%. They believe that he'll win Iowa. Now,
that's right.
This is pretty incredible. This is not something that you see normally on CNN. So having said that, you spent some time in Iowa. What do you think? Does he have a shot at winning?
He does have a shot at winning the Iowa caucus, and that was the point of a CNN.com column I did yesterday, saying, look, don't count Ron Paul out in Iowa. This was apparent when I was there last week. You could see not only the intensities of his supporters, and Ron Paul supporters are famously intense, but this is a campaign that's really effectively been going on for 4 years, since the last time he ran for president. And in many cases, in many ways, his views have been vindicated. So given that caucuses are high-intensity, low-turnout elections, that you should not count Ron Paul out. And the impact of Ron Paul pulling off an upset in Iowa would resonate throughout.
How so?
Campaign. Well, first of all, I think a Ron Paul win ends up being a de facto benefit for Mitt Romney because it takes Newt Gingrich out of the narrative. It forces him to fight in South Carolina and Florida without win under his belt. Mitt Romney right now still has that glass ceiling that's been bedeviling him this entire campaign, but the support is now diffused. The opposition to Mitt Romney seems more diffused than it was 2 weeks ago when Newt Gingrich was sucking up all that support.
Right.
But Ron Paul has an independent base of support. His folks are not fickle. They are not going anywhere. They are true believers. And I believe they're outside the stereotype of Ron Paul supporters, particularly in Iowa.
Well, you touched on this because you talked about how ardent his supporters are, how emphatic they are. I mean, you just look at his ground game in Iowa. I mean, he has run not a year-and-a-half campaign like a lot of people, but a 5-year campaign because his supporters never left. They continued knocking on doors. And in a sense, Ron Paul never left. Now, having said that, you've spent some time in Iowa. And, Ron Paul's supporters, if you read the media reports, they're college students who want to legalize pot. But you saw something different there.
I did. I don't think they deserve to be stereotyped that narrowly. I went to a Ron Paul town hall in Marshalltown, Iowa, and it was filled with, middle-class, blue-collar folks who were just there in an early Saturday morning to hear what he had to say, and they were nodding their heads. Probably around 20 of the crowd of 100 stuck around to organize Iowa. So I do think in many cases his views, while people can disagree with different parts of the Ron Paul formula, in some core ways his views have been vindicated. He deserves credit, I think, for philosophical consistency. He was making these points when it was very unpopular during the Bush years. Whether you call his foreign policy non-interventionist or near-isolationist, there's that skepticism about the wars. There's a skepticism about the Fed, given what we've learned. There's that sense of that he is a consistent constitutionalist that appeals to people in Iowa. So I think people should take Ron Paul seriously. I think he deserves credit for his intellectual influence inside the Republican Party, and this just might be his time.
Our polling also shows that the one thing that voters really, really like about Ron Paul is that he's least likely to act like a typical politician. Now, having said that, let's look ahead to the general election here. I mean, isn't that a liability in the general election?
Not just that. Look, I mean, people don't want a typical politician. They want someone who's authentic, and Ron Paul is defiantly himself. There's no question. But the question of Ron Paul being a general election nominee, that's where things get a little more dicey.
Right.
I think, the chances of an upset in Iowa are, I don't know if they're as strong as Nate Silver says, but they should not be counted out. That said, general election nominee, could Ron Paul be the nominee of the party that, famously rallied behind the Bush family twice? It is a fundamentally different philosophy of government. That becomes more difficult to believe, but he has enthusiasm that other candidates can't buy. And so that deserves to be taken in context and seen with a sense of respect. One interesting thing about the CNN poll is Ron Paul's support, people who say that they would not consider voting for him among the undecided Republican primary voters, higher than those who say they're open to voting for him in the total field. So that's an important wrinkle and a detail to appreciate as we look at Ron Paul's status.
All right, so then as you look at that, if you're a betting man, What do you think?
I think
2 weeks away.
Look, if we just look at Iowa, separate from the national polling, I think Ron Paul deserves to be taken seriously. I think he could very easily pull off an upset in Iowa, and that would shake up the race big time.
All right, we're going to hold you to it. We're going to come back. We're going to bring you here.
We'll see. Keep in mind, most important thing, not a single vote has been cast.
That's
so
right.
Everybody gets ahead of themselves. At the end of the day, the Iowa voters, the primary voters, they're the folks who make the decision. We're just looking at the weather and saying, you know what, there's a storm front coming.